Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasa. All right, so this evening is the full moon, and it's the Uposatha, a fairly auspicious time to come together and to practice and to examine our commitment to spiritual practice. And there's been a theme that Bhante and I have been talking a little bit as we've gotten to know, sort of got our feet in several different communities here in New York City, and getting to see the various levels of growth and community and responsibility in these different venues. And so we've been kind of talking about what that looks like and how people feel encouraged to take that on. So I thought tonight to talk a little bit about the idea of spiritual growth, which is very, very important and fundamental in Buddhism. So actually, when we look at Eastern and Western philosophy, this is one principal difference between the two. And then in Eastern philosophies, you tend to find this idea of development of character, of a development of skill, of a purification, of a training. And even more so in Buddhism, we find that this idea is, it's absolutely fundamental. It's an interesting question to ask ourselves. What are the aspects in our lives where we think we can improve? And then where are the places where we are actually applying ourselves to improve? So there's a wonderful sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, and it's one of my favorites, even though, nobody anywhere considers it like a foundational sutta, but it's a little discourse to a man called Moggallana the accountant. Is such a simple, average guy walking up and talking to the Buddha that we don't even know his real name. We just know he was part of the Moggallana clan and that he was an accountant. But in this particular dialogue, Moggallana comes up to the Buddha and says, here in this vihara, in this place that you're living, when they built it, they built it in stages. They started with the foundation, and then they added the first floor, and then the second floor, and then they put a roof on it, and they polished it off. Likewise, when we're training new accountants, we train them sequentially. We sit them down and we say, okay, now what's 1 1, 2 2s, 3 3s, 4 4s, all the way out to 100 100s and 1,000 1,000s. And we train them over and over again until they can do this just instantly. And so Moggallana the accountant, he asked the Buddha, is there a similar training and progress in the Dhamma and discipline that you are teaching? And the Buddha said, absolutely. And he lays out what's called the gradual training. And it's a sequential training that starts with sila, and then a development in sense restraints, which is like the 8 precepts, is a development of sila. Then into mindfulness, contentment, devotion to wakefulness, all the way into the development of samadhi and the jhanas and incredible insights. And the Buddha kind of just lays all of this out. And Moggallana the accountant is like, yeah, that's awesome. And it's a great little dialogue, because this is important to Buddhism. This idea that we're just laying it out, and it's like you can get better at these things. But it's not just this path of practice, and we put a lot of stock in like my path, my practice, my development, the things I'm moving towards Nibbana, I'm going to get enlightened. But this goes way beyond that. And I say, so we can, first it's important to consider that there are some obstacles to the idea of growth. And these are also fundamental to the way that the world works. And there's 3 of them, and they're sometimes just called the 3 fetters, and they're part of a larger group called the 10 fetters. And so before we can really talk about growth, we have to acknowledge that these things exist, these mental states exist, and we have to set them aside. So one of the ways that we prevent ourselves from thinking about growth is that we believe that we have some part of ourselves that will not or cannot change. We call this Sakkaya Ditthi. And so we have to set this aside. We have to say, okay, yeah, that exists, but actually in this moment, let's just start with the idea that maybe anything can change, and just allow that. The second one is the confusion about what is right and wrong. The belief that there are, it's all just kind of random. And this is actually important in Western philosophy. It's like everything's equal, it's all the same. But let's set that aside too. And let's say that there are skillful things that can be cultivated, and there are unskillful things that can be minimized, avoided, reduced, and prevented. And I had this worked out in my head before. We call that one doubt. It's the fetter of doubt. And then the final one is what we call Silabbata Paramasa, which this is the idea that I'm going to get better through the things that I do. It's like, as long as I keep doing certain things better, I will get better automatically. And so we also have to set that aside, because this is very important to the idea that we can intentionally get better. It's not that we're just going to keep bathing in a purified river, or that we're going to keep bowing to the shrine and gradually we're going to become a better person. If we have anger, we have to address the anger before we become a kind person. If we have a lot of greed and stinginess, then we have to address that and practice generosity before we can become a generous and open-handed person. So we have to set aside the idea that we're automatically getting better. But once we set aside these 3 ideas, now I put it to the question, like, do we really believe this now? Is this really the way that we are running our lives? So I ask you to think of the different avenues of activity and growth in your life. And do you really believe you can get better? And so we think about this, and actually, when we look at it, we might find that a lot of the things that we do are probably because we're already kind of good at them. That the things that we're not good at, we probably avoid as best we can. And that's normal. It's especially normal in lay life. And sort of becoming a monastic is actually finding ourselves in a variety of situations where we're not good at what we do. Like, we didn't enter this to be in public speaking. In fact, our first few years of monasticism, we're like, I'm not doing this to be a teacher. And then eventually somebody says, hey, you're the most senior one here. You're in charge, do it. And but that's the first thing to think about, is like, are we actually leaning into the places where we're weak and trying to develop it? And the second thing to think about is, are there any things where we really believe in a sequential and determined growth, where we really apply ourselves? So maybe there are some things that we believe we get better at, but we don't really think about getting better. It just happens naturally. Like, say say one day we pick up a Sudoku puzzle, and sort of like we do it, and we're like, it takes a long time and it's really hard, but we kind of enjoy it. So then the next day we pick up another one and we kind of do it, and we keep doing Sudoku puzzles day after day, or crosswords or Monopoly or chess or anything. And somehow way down the line, we realize we're good at Sudoku puzzles, and we're all proud of ourselves, right? Now, did we train at doing Sudoku puzzles, or did we just do them and get better automatically? Did we sit there and think, what are the causes and conditions of getting better at this? Do we work through the obstacles, or do we just do this thing when it was easy, and keep doing it when it's easy until everything became easy? Yeah. Now, there's some places in our life where we actually really apply ourselves. So if somebody's going to be a pilot, like they actually have to run through books, training manuals. If somebody's going to be like a gourmet chef, you have to work, and you have to be like a monastic. You have to show up and be like the lowest guy on the totem pole, and just kind of get worked until you're better at it. And you really determine this. So where in our lives are we willing to commit to that? And why is that? Where's the interest there? And so now, say kind of set the field and what we're talking about. I might turn it over to Bhante Santi to hear perspectives to say, and now what in like a spiritual life is not subject to this? What is not available for growth? And what is growth? Where can we apply ourselves?
Those are great questions. Maybe I'll start with a question for each of you to reflect on, and maybe take a moment just to answer for yourself. What do you mean by the word spiritual when you think about spirituality? When Bhante Pamutto invites us to reflect on spiritual growth, what does that really mean, spirituality? How do you define it to yourself? I'm not asking you to come up with a definition, but just kind of an image or a feeling. I have a kind of personal mantra among a whole set of them. Mantra might not be quite the right word, more of kind of a personal guideline or principle for working with the Dhamma. I think it's really helpful to, and maybe it's just a necessary part of learning for each of us, to come up with little ideas that help us out along the way. This is a really simple one. It's an encouragement to myself to make the translation of the Dhamma term that I might come across in a teaching or in a sutta or in a Dhamma book to the modern language that I grew up with and that my mental environment runs on. So the spiritual growth that we're talking about here, well, what does that relate to in the suttas? What is it that I'm translating here and coming to as spiritual growth? I know that some of us, when we think about spirituality, might think of something occult or lofty and elevated that we're growing towards, something mystical. I think that's part of the idea of spirituality, probably for many of us who use that word unashamedly. So what does that translate to in our understanding of the Dhamma? I think for myself, Bhante Pamutto is right on target, pointing to the gradual training, pointing to the Buddhist path of sila, bhavana, panya, pointing to, although I'm not sure he named it quite yet, the third major representation of the Buddhist teaching, the Noble Eightfold Path. These are the principal kind of traditional frameworks that the Buddha gave us for thinking about what I think is best translated as spiritual development. The Noble Eightfold Path, the Gradual Training, Sila, Bhavana, Panya. They end with something ineffable, but they're made out of the stuff of our lives, of our existence, our conduct. That's the domain of Sila. The way we work with our minds. This is the domain of Bhavana. So if we look at each of these domains of action, of spiritual development, we can think about what is the work that we're encouraged to pursue for growth as opposed to for stagnation or decline. We tend in American Dhamma circles to really zone in on bhavana, and if we're feeling philosophical, we'll talk about panya. But actually, these three major divisions of the Buddha's guidance to us, of the path, are all intertwined, and they can't really be separated. The realm of conduct, how we act, what we do, that's fully half of our being. If we want to make the translation to modern terms, in terms of like what our minds do, well, we've got these sensory faculties and we've got these motor faculties. We've got and they're intertwined, the sensory motor faculties. You can't take them apart. Doing and perceiving are the fabric of our reality. So we can't kind of think about sila, our conduct, as something simply that we kind of we do at the beginning of the path, or that we kind of can just take for granted while we focus on the cool stuff. In fact, our inner realms are simply a reflection of our external experience, aren't they? We do in the world, and then we watch ourselves doing in meditation. We imagine ourselves doing in meditation. We abstract from it and think about it in abstract terms. And sometimes we just resonate with it without even much of a we there. And remarkably, we have this remarkable ability as human beings to see that that's happening. That's the remarkable ability that allows for growth, that allows for us to actually move forward in the course of development that's laid out for us by the Buddha. Bhante mentioned the first three fetters: Sakya Ditti, self-view. Well, that's what I was just talking about. That moment that we can come to in meditation, when we can see how our experience is creating the sense of self, creating a we to experience. Well, that's what gives us the capacity to, well, even to understand what Sakya Ditti is. To recognize that it really is a kind of delusion. And all of our practice of sila, our ongoing practice of sila, and our practice of bhavana, and our practice of panya, is to bring us into a condition where we can see that basic, simple truth. Only because of that capacity can we recognize that our actions reflect our inner states. This is the aspect of Silabhata Paramasa that Bhante was pointing at. It's not really about the doing of the deed, even if it's a good deed, a ritual act, a purifying act, an act that externally is a perfectly wholesome act. The development comes in the mental state that it engenders or that it strengthens. And the goodness flows from that state into the continuation of the act and then the effects of that act. And finally, that perspective that's afforded on our action and on the way we create ourselves in each moment. That perspective is what clarifies our doubt, what clarifies our uncertainty in the path. We see that developing our sila, purifying our minds through bhavana, we see that that works, that leads us towards wholesome states, that strengthens wholesome states, and then it causes the unwholesome ones to fall away. And we gain confidence. I think that may speak to some of the questions that Bhante was raising, but maybe he'd like to chime in at this point.
Yes, yeah, actually. One of the growths in community is to see the value of exchange and the value of dialogue. And I think to your own questions, Bhante, like what do we mean when we say spiritual? And what it brought up in me is the reflection of, well, what is it that grows? And when we ask ourselves, like, what do I believe that is it that grows? We believe in spiritual growth. We believe in spirituality, but what is it we're defining? Because we've already said that Sakkaya Ditthi is a problem. The belief that there is some static individual holds us back from really looking at the things that can change, which is really anything when we put our mind to it. But yet, nevertheless, we believe that something is developing. And that's what the Eightfold Path is really about. There's many instances where the Buddha or one of his disciples was given a line of questioning, and the person just kept saying, well, what is this for? And what is this for? And what does this lead to? And what does this lead to? And eventually the line of questioning would always get to Nibbana. And the idea of Nibbana is peace, is purity. It literally means cooling. So the cooling of the heart, where all of the causes of suffering have finally ceased, Nibbana. And in many of these instances, the questioner would then say, but what is Nibbana for? And the Buddha would say, there, you failed to grasp the end of the questioning. For the holy life is lived for the sake of Nibbana. And that is both a hint into what is developing and a hint into how the development is done. So really looking beyond the idea that there's something in us that has to, that is physical and needs to be something different, but seeing that it's really about our decisions, our choices, our conduct, the way that we interact with our mind and our understanding of the world. And that just like when we do our first Sudoku puzzle, or when we begin building a house, we have an idea, But that idea, with every action, with every solution, with every nail, that idea develops as we go. It's not about point A and then point B, but there's a whole transition through all of those points. And the reality is that time is an illusion, is that there is development of both the goal, like the goal becomes better understood as we move along, but our ability to move towards that goal also develops. And so the Eightfold Path is giving us a structure, like there are these ways that we grow, but the Eightfold Path is for Nibbana. So what's growing is our sense of peace, is our sense of clarity, is our sense of coolness, our sense of release. And it's interesting that very specifically this Buddhist concept is that it is a goal that can be reached. And once it is reached, it is fulfilled. We are complete because there is Nibbana. There is a complete cooling where there are no longer defilements, corruptions of the mind. And this is part of working with doubt, is to understand that there are things that are corruptions of mind. There are things that are antithetical to Nibbana. And that these are the things that we are deciding to remove, to clarify, to purify, to allow to cease. And that is what we mean by practice. And while these things might not be physical things that we can point to, nevertheless, we know from day to day, from moment to moment, I'm doing stuff. And I can adapt and grow in my way of doing stuff in the world, in my way of thinking about things and relating to the thoughts that are arising. And the whole way that I see the world can develop to be more in accord with the way that things actually are. And this is what's being presented to us. And as I thought of applying this principle, across the board, it's like, is there anything in Buddhism that this doesn't work for? And it's like, oh, you just say there's growth in everything. There's growth in the Eightfold Path. There's growth in right view. There's growth in right effort. There's growth in right mindfulness. Like we sit down and we try to be mindful of the breath, and in 2 seconds we're distracted. And so, we're like, okay, I got distracted. Okay, let's back to the breath. And maybe we get 3 seconds and then we get distracted. But we honestly believe it's like, well, I wouldn't be put to this task unless this was possible, unless I could get better at this. And, we're developing. We're really putting ourselves to it. And eventually we can be with the breath for minutes or even hours, and it was through applying ourselves. But then, is there growth in Buddha? It's like, well, the idea of Buddha is the idea of being able to attain Nibbana. A personal development is possible. Is there growth in Dhamma? Well, just listening to a talk or having a Dhamma conversation is developing our understanding. And what really led to this was the idea of growth in Sangha. And this is where perhaps it takes a little bit of insight, because in America, we've got such a mishmash of different Buddhist traditions. But we've also got religions other religions that have come in there. And many of them have these ideas of like, you do this thing, you'll get this. You go to church on Sundays, you'll get this. Or pray this many times a day, you'll get this. Or follow this set of rules and you'll get this. And so that can sometimes work its way into our communities. And it's like, I just show up, or I just offer food to the monks, or I just chant this thing so many times and I'll get good results. And for the most part, it's true. You will get good results. But what we're talking about in terms of spiritual growth is to nevertheless see a possibility for development. And so tonight, taking the 8 precepts, whether that is an extension of just giving 1 hour to the 8 precepts, or 1 day to the 8 precepts, or beginning a path of keeping them for longer. This is an example of growth in Sila. You know, we start out and it's unconscionable to not kill mosquitoes. They're taking my blood. How dare they? They deserve to die. It's a capital punishment. But then we start to be like, well, I bet I could deal with this in a more skillful way. But then we start getting good at it. So we foresee like there's still room for development here, and on and on and on. Yeah, and so it can encourage us to look at the things that we do and say, is there a place where maybe more engaged, more part of this, where I can develop this, I can grow in this? Where is the way that I actually see the place for growth in this? And it's like us as monastics, we kind of we saw other monastics and we're like, you know, we saw where we were. We saw that we were lay people, and we're like, okay, that could be a good idea. And this was the Buddha too. It's like there was a time before he was a monastic, and he saw a renunciate, and he's like, oh, that's a great idea. Renunciation is a good thing. And he couldn't do it just right there on the spot because he had a wife, he had a child, he had a kingdom. It took sequential steps of renunciation. So it took growth. Yeah? And that's what we mean by growth. It's not always just gaining stuff, like getting a spiritual bank account. Sometimes it's growth in what we've let go of. And sometimes that takes real effort. Yeah? So what is it that grows? What is spirituality? That's any further reflections that brings up for you? But also turn it over to dialogue. Or...
Yeah, no, I think that was nice. We did tail off.
Well, very good. So I am growing in my understanding of people's sensitivity to privacy and all of these things. So I'm going to be turning off the recording now, but we'll open it up to sort of dialogue. We've got our friends in the Zoom room, our friends here, and we'll just see where the conversation leads. And tonight being the full moon, the Buddha actually allowed us to talk on Dhamma during Uposatha. So this is, we'll just say sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.